Why do I believe in God? And then why do I believe Jesus is the crucial, key, decisive revelation of God? The reason I believe in God, and I could give a lot of reasons for this, but I guess the thing that really convinced me that there must be a God who created it all is this. I remember the University of Minnesota. I was an atheist. I was reading a lot of Friedrich Nietzsche and Jean-Paul Sartre and really just trying to live out this nihilistic, meaningless existence. But I was miserable. And at some point, it was actually after reading Albert Camus' fantastic book, The Myth of Sisyphus. I read it in one sitting down in a cafe because the professor had told me that it helped him find meaning in life. So I read this book, The Myth of Sisyphus. And Sisyphus was this Greek legendary hero who defied the gods and lived one day longer than he was supposed to live and was condemned to eternally push a rock up a hill as punishment. And for Albert Camus, Sisyphus was a hero because he chose to live one day longer than he was supposed to, even though it was an absurd choice. And Albert Camus says, well, you know, life is absurd, it's meaningless, it's pointless, and it's painful. And one can make the rational case that we should commit suicide. But by refusing to commit suicide, we are, as it were, defying the gods, even though, of course, the gods don't exist. But it gives our lives a certain stoic dignity and valor to just gut it out in the face of meaningless, absurd existence, to just go on living despite it all. We're spitting in the wind. And this, my professor thought, would help me come to grips with the meaninglessness of life and give me a sense of purpose. And after reading that, I thought to myself, that's a crock. I mean, if the universe has no value and is meaningless, who cares whether you're courageous and valiant and heroic or not? I mean, where'd that value come from? And I was thinking, if this is the best you can do in a meaningless universe, I might be in trouble here, because I was really wondering, why do we try to do anything if it all comes to nothingness? So while I was sitting there in that cafe, having finished this book, thinking about all this, it all of a sudden occurred to me as odd that I'm longing for something that doesn't exist, namely meaning. And how do I explain that? And then I began to wonder, I'm trying to make sense out of life. But if life is senseless, well, how did a creature like me who's trying to make sense out of it ever evolve? And I had this intuition that good should overcome evil. One of the reasons why being an atheist was so hard is that it seems like in the end, evil wins. I mean, death is the last word. It all comes to nothingness. All of our hopes and dreams to make the world a better place come to nothing. And so where did this intuition that good should overcome evil come from? And it struck me that the core of who I am is a being. What it is to be a human being is to be someone who longs for meaning and wants to do meaningful things, and someone who wants to make sense out of life, and someone who wants good to triumph over evil. And yet, if the universe is simply this nothingness, this meaningless thing that absurdly exists, then reasoning and meaning and morality have no place in it. So I'm like a fish out of water. And that raised two questions. How do you explain me? How did an irrational universe produce an irrational being? How did a meaningless universe produce a meaningful being? And how did an amoral universe produce a moral being? That seems very odd. It seems like it makes much more sense to assume that, since the effect can never be greater than the cause, if I'm the effect, the cause must be at least as personal, and at least as rational, at least as meaningful, and at least as moral as me. The other thing is, I wondered, how is it that the universe could create a being who longs for things that don't exist? Because when you look around, the pattern in nature is that nature produces beings who have longings that it supplies. So, we're hungry and there's food. And we get thirsty and there's water. And we have sex drives and there's sex. Well, where did this longing for meaning and for goodness and for reason come from? It's like having a drive for a kind of fruit that doesn't exist, but it's an insatiable drive. You can think of it like this. If I went down the Amazon and found some Amazon people who were making skis and waxing skis, and they kept talking about snow, and they were longing to go snow skiing. And it was a deep drive of theirs, to the point where some people were committing suicide because they can't go snow skiing. Well, you'd have to explain that. somewhere along the line, these people got the idea that snow exists and that snowing was a good thing, even a necessary thing. Trouble is, it doesn't snow down in the Amazon, so we'd have to explain that. So also, how do you explain human beings who sometimes commit suicide because life is meaningless and pointless? If the universe is meaningless and pointless, that should be the most natural, easy conclusion in the world. If God doesn't exist, why is, as even Nietzsche and Sartre admit, why is being a consistent atheist the hardest thing in the world? Jean-Paul Sartre, towards the end of his life, in an essay, Existentialism and Atheism, he says, being an atheist that's consistent with integrity is the hardest thing imaginable. I've tried to live it out to the very end. Well, why is it so difficult if, in fact, it's the natural conclusion? If we're made in the image of God, everything makes sense. I can understand how I am rational and how I long for meaning and how I want good to triumph over evil. If I'm made in the image of a God who is mind itself, and a God whose very being is moral, and a God who is personal and purposeful and meaningful, now I can make sense. If there is no God, life is absurd, painful, and there's no explanation for anything. So that was why I believe in a personal, moral, purposeful God who created me and all of humanity and everything that exists. The reason I believe that Jesus is the ultimate revelation of that God, a lot of it has to do with all the historical evidence that supports the general reliability of the Gospels and other evidence that really in various ways supports his existence and things of that sort. But on top of that, there's this. Anyone who believes that there is any point to life, or at least suspects there might be a point to life, if they're at all healthy, they know it has something to do with love. It has something to do with love. That's just a kind of a core, basic human intuition. The point is about love. The Gospels, if you understand them, the story of Jesus, if you understand them rightly, represent the greatest love story ever told. Because it's the story of an all-holy, omnipotent God becoming a human being and dying a God-forsaken, hellish death on the cross out of love for a people who could deserve it less. It's the greatest love story ever told because you couldn't have a love story where a lover crossed a greater distance and made a greater sacrifice for a beloved who deserved it less. The incongruity is the poignancy of this story. And by that criteria, this is the greatest love story ever told. And so when you read, even apart from all the historical evidence, if you understand the gospel story, there's something inside of us that goes yes to it. At the very least, we want that to be true. There's something that says that ought to be true. C.S. Lewis said that the Jesus story is myth become incarnate. Because what mythology is imperfect expressions of what our heart wants to be true and expects to be true. It's like an intuition about ultimate reality. But if you're not given the revelation of the true thing, you kind of project it on the basis of your own thinking and your own intuitions. And that's what great mythology is about. In Jesus, and J.R. Tolkien said the same thing. In Jesus, we find the deepest intuitions of our greatest myths incarnated, and we have every reason to believe that they're true. And that not only satisfies the heart, but it satisfies the head. Here we have a worldview centered on Jesus Christ that we can live with, that has the power to transform our life and give meaning to our life. And there's a deep, deep part of our inner intuition that says yes to it, on top of all the historical evidence we have for believing it's true. I know some folks who resist surrendering their life to Jesus because they can't be 100% certain. And that really is a misconception of what faith is. The question is not, are you 100% certain? The question is, do you have enough reasons to believe to get on the plane? Do you have enough reasons to believe to start this walk, to start living your life patterned on Him, to start talking to Him? And you'll find that as you do that, you begin to experience the Lord, you begin to experience His love and His power, and your confidence increases. But you never, in faith never gets to the point of being like a mathematical or a logical truth where it can't possibly be wrong. It's always, there's always some room for doubt if that's what you want to do.